Greetings, we are in Senior English A, and our work today will focus specifically on the great Italian sonneteer Petrarch. I'm with you on page 326, 327. The first thing you want to write down in your day planner are the dates for Petrarch. And then make a quick observation just looking at those dates. Let's call it 1350, just to make it simple. Let's call it 1350. And then immediately identify two things. One, Petrarch is no contemporary of Shakespeare, of Spenser, of the rest of the writers we've been reading. Those are Renaissance writers. Petrarch, notice at the top of page 326 it says themes across cultures. Do you see that? What they're doing now is they're giving you two poems from an earlier time, 1350. Wait a minute, 1350 takes us back to what century? 14th century. 1350, who is it that you're going to write down as being one of the great writers of that time period that we've already looked at from our hymnal? I'll give you a hint. He wrote these amazing satirical pieces that were like little short stories that created serious controversy in England. His name was what? Geoffrey Chaucer. You'll remember Chaucer. So Petrarch is actually a contemporary of that cat. So we're going back in time. At 1350, if you use 1600 as your date for the English Renaissance and Shakespeare, and that's a good working date, you're talking almost 300 years difference in time between these two guys. Another way to say this for your notes is that Petrarch is in many ways the inventor of the form, the sonnet, and that's why they're going to place it here in your hymnal, so you can at least have some respect for what's going on. By the way, dude, what's up with that thing on this guy's head in the picture on page 326? Do you have any sense of that? What is that thing around his head? Does anyone know what that is?
Some type of a symbol.
This is a laurel leaf, right? A laurel leaf. Now, what's up with laurel leaves? Well, this comes from a very ancient story of the Greek tradition. The god Apollo, do you remember this one, Mr. Keeley? The god Apollo likes the beautiful human girl named Daphne. He sees her all alone. He comes down and visits her. She's in the woods going out for a nice walk. And Apollo says, you and I are about to have a thing. To which Daphne says, I'm not interested in sleeping with the god because ultimately I will die. He says, I'm really not interested in your view of it. And he chases her. Daphne will turn around. She will run from god Apollo. But you can't outrun a god. And so what she does is she falls down on the ground and she prays to Zeus to say, please deliver me or save me. She falls down on her knees and she puts her arms up to the sky as so. In saving Daphne, Apollo is chasing her. In saving Daphne, Zeus will turn Daphne into a tree. Not just any tree, but a very famous tree in Greek tradition. It's called the laurel tree. And today, if you visit, as I've taken students to Athens before and outside of the area there, you can see these trees, and they do strangely almost always have predominantly two branches that reach toward the sky. It's kind of an interesting tree in this regards. Now, what the Greeks did is they would take small branches off of that tree, they would intertwine them, a la the picture here, and they would then they would put it on the head, are you ready for this? Put it on the head as a crown of the victor in the games at Olympus, a site that today you can visit, and you can actually go and visit these ruins, and you can see where they used to do this little foot race. If you won, you didn't get money, you didn't get Nike endorsements, you didn't even get a medal. What you got was simply this laurel branch that was placed on top of your head. Ultimately, phrases like don't sit on your laurels will come to mean don't gain accomplishments and then just live off of those accomplishments. You got to keep doing something beyond your accomplishments. That's what it means to say don't sit on your laurels. To have the laurel leaf around your head is to designate, and painters would often do it. And that's what's going on here. This is a painting you're looking at of Petrarch. What does it mean that he has the laurel leaf around his head? It means basically he's the bomb. He's the greatest poet. Often when you see pictures of Dante, the great Italian poet, he will also have the laurel leaf around his head to suggest or designate the very best. All right, here we go. Let's take a look now at Sonnet 90, Sonnet 292. The first thing we should point out is, do you see it there on 328, 329? At the bottom of each one of the sonnets, notice that you're told who the translator is. Now, why is that a big deal? You haven't seen this very often in our text. How come? We've been reading since September British authors. That is to say, they write in the English language. So we're not working with translation. Here, we're working with translation. Now, for those of you that started working and writing your sonnet, and you're already finding how difficult it is to get that ba-bum, 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 ba-bum thing going, and then you have to have rhyme scheme on top of that for 14 lines, and then be able to say anything of merit. Imagine what it's like to try to translate one of these sonnets out of the Italian into English. Let's just point out, this is not an easy project. Yes, this is a somewhat difficult project, which is why we're going to celebrate any translator that's gifted enough, if not insane enough, to try and pick up one of these sonnets and translate them. Let's just say it out loud, though. And I remember, Miss Benitez, once long ago, that it seems like we had another poem that we read that was translated for us out of Spanish. And I made this same observation, and it seems to me that you were the one that was allowed to read this poem in the original language. And I think I said then what I'll say now, and that is this. As good as it sounds in translation, it never sounds as good as it sounds in the original, okay? In the original Italian, these poems are sheer magic. They're not bad in English, but they're nothing compared to what they are in the original language. Let's take a look. Notice these sonnets are simply numbered. Petrarch didn't give his sonnets any titles, per se. Notice that in the Shakespearean sonnets, the titles are always what? Did you notice this? They're given a number, but they're always what also? They're always the first line of the poem. We often will reference them that way. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun, Sonnet 130. By the way, a hint for the exam. You want to know the first line of all of these sonnets by their number or by the title. You want to know it. So memorize it. Write the 9 or 10 down and memorize the number. So if in the exam it says Sonnet 130, you know immediately that from our reading, we're talking about Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, and more particularly, My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. If you don't know that kind of intel, you're going to struggle on the exam of tomorrow. Got me? The easy way to do that is to write it down on one sheet of paper. It's a great way to review as well. All right? All right, here we go. Sonnet 90. The first thing I want to say about this sonnet is that, first of all, the speaker, we can assume it's Petrarch, although we don't have to assume that. He describes the concept of falling in love with a woman. And then we're going to have this comparison thing happening. She's compared to an angel. You may want to write that down. He will call her a heavenly spirit and a living sun. This, by the way, is the whole notion of sonnets that will picture women as being beautiful by virtue of the light or the heat. Okay. He says that what he believed was a look of pity from this woman caused his love for her to ignite. It might be that, for example, she really didn't love him, but nonetheless, it led to ignition for his love. Although his beloved's beauty is now faded, that is to say she's gotten older, still, he loves her, okay? Still, he loves her, in spite of the fact that she's gotten old. A 3A observation to be made right now at Sonnet 116, love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. You'll remember, Mr. Nelson, that was one of the lines of Shakespeare. In other words, just because a person gets old doesn't mean that the lover will stop loving that person. Let's take a look. Sonnet 90. Upon the breeze she spread her golden hair, that in 1,000 gentle knots was turned, and the sweet light beyond all measure burned in eyes where now that radiance is rare. And in her face there seemed to come an air of pity, true or false that I discerned. I had love's tender in my breast unburned. Was it a wonder if it kindled there? She moved not like a mortal, but as though she bore an angel's form. Her words had then a sound that simple human voices lack. A heavenly spirit, a living sun, was what I saw. Now, if it is not so, the wound's not healed because the bow grows slack. Notice your sidebar at the very end of this poem says, I still ache with love for her, even though her beauty has faded. Petrarch here alludes to Cupid, the Roman god of love, often portrayed as an archer whose arrows pierce the heart and cause someone to fall in love. That's the whole thing about the bow at the end of this poem. All right, let's take a look now at Sonnet 292. Now here, you got a different kind of poem going on, okay? You're going to have a poem that celebrates beauty. So at 3A, you want to juxtapose or compare this poem to Sonnet 130 of Shakespeare. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Maybe an easy way to say this is, Petrarch invented the poem by saying, my mistress' eyes are like the sun. And that's why Shakespeare could play the game at 130 of the antithetical view. In this poem, the speaker will describe his beloved or lover's beauty, saying that this woman made earth a paradise for him, heaven, was his muse, M-U-S-E. What is a muse? If, by the way, I were to say about Mr. Ramos, he amuses me, is that good or bad?
It depends on how
If you say someone amuses you, what does that mean? Is that good or bad?
It depends on
No, it's always good. To say that someone amuses you means that someone makes you feel happy. All right? Now, but that's the word amuse. It's similar to this word. The Greeks had this idea of a space, M-U-S-E. Mr. Rothlein, are you familiar with the concept of a muse? The Greeks had this idea of a muse. For guys, the muse was almost always a woman. Not just any woman, but what? A stunningly beautiful woman. A stunningly beautiful woman. That was the muse. For the Greeks, the eternal muses, though, were who? They were goddesses. They were goddesses. They actually lived on Mount Olympus. But I don't understand. What is this concept of the muse? What does it even mean? Inspiration, write that down. When we say that a person is the muse for the artist, we mean that person inspires in some way. What does it mean to inspire? Does that word mean anything to you? What does it mean to say you inspire me? Yeah, you cause me, you make me to want to do something, to create or whatever, right? See, because this is always the question to ask artists. Let me get this straight. It starts out as a completely white canvas, right? Right. And then you pick up paint, right? Right. How do you know where to start to make the first mark? See, I love to ask artists this question, and they'll often look at you like, you clearly don't understand art. No, I mean, seriously, how did you know what color to start with and what part of the canvas to start with? Did someone tell you? Well, no, not normally. Well, then how did you know? And how did you know what to create when you created this work of art? Or songwriters, how did you know what the song was going to... Well, I don't know. It was like I had this thing in my head that was just kind of an idea, and then I started. The Greeks called that inspiration. And poets, from the Greek time up through Petrarch, argued that a beautiful woman could inspire the poet to write something amazing. He says of this woman's beauty that her beauty inspired him to write poetry, set him apart from other men. But now, and this is important in this poem 292, the woman is dead. He's lost his muse. She lives no more. And now he lives in grief. Because not only is he sad she's gone, but what else is gone? The inspiration to write. Yeah, the inspiration to write. The Pablo Neruda poem comes to mind, Tonight I Can Write, built in many ways off of the 292. I just made another 3A observation. Man, if you don't know Neruda's poem, Tonight I Can Write, it's one of the more beautiful poems of his production. We read it as sophomores, if you will recall, those of you who studied out of that blue anthology. Let's take a look now at Petrarch's 292. The eyes I spoke of once in words that burn. The arms and hands and feet and lovely face that took me from myself for such a space of time and marked me out from other men. The waving hair of unmixed gold that shone, the smile that flashed with the angelic rays that used to make this earth a paradise, are now a little dust, all feeling gone. And yet I live, hence grief and rage for me, left where the light I cherished never shows, in fragile bark on the tempestuous sea. Here, let my loving song come to a close. The vein of my accustomed art is dry, and this, my lyre, turned at last to tears. A lyre would be our version of the guitar. In other words, he says, I used to, because of her amazing beauty, I used to be inspired to write. Now she's gone. Now I have nothing. By the way, notice the form real quickly of both of these poems. Do you see it? Whereas before, Shakespeare's sonnets, you'll recall, and Spenser's sonnets, all one single block. Do you see it? But notice in these poems you have an identifiable break. Do you see it? We have 4 lines, which, again, what do we call that 4-line collection? A quatrain. You have a second set of 4 lines, right? That gets you to your number 8. Remember, sonnets have to have 14 lines. Your last 2 stanzas, though, notice, for Petrarchian sonnets, are divided up into 3-line stanzas. Do you see it? The identification here is a little bit different in terms of the Petrarchian sonnets. All right? The only point now in conclusion we want to make about Petrarch is that he in many ways is the great influencer of the Renaissance poets. They all will have studied their Italian poetry, and they know what Petrarch can do. Their goal is to do the same game in the English language. Just to finish, you'll remember in September, because remember, Mr. Ramos, we picked up at the middle of our book, remember? We started in Unit 4, which we called what? Do you remember what they were? Those writers were what time period? What epoch were they? We call them the Romantic poets. And you'll recall that one of the first poems we looked at was a little ditty that was written by a guy named Wordsworth that went, the world is too much with us late and soon. Getting and spending we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We've given our hearts away, a sordid boon. That's a sonnet of 14 lines. Wordsworth in 1800 is still playing the game of sonnet writing. So if you want to put it in your notes this way, this is an easy way to see it. 1350, Petrarch's playing the game. 1600, Shakespeare's still playing the game of sonnet writing. 200 years later, Wordsworth is still playing the game of the sonnet, right? And so I want you to kind of get a sense of the continuation of this form. Yes, today, modern poets will still play the game of writing really popular poems. In the 20th century, Edna St. Vincent Millay was one of the great American poets who would write from the sonnet perspective, all right? Do you have any